checks and employment screening solutions. People G2 gives their clients access to the best human capital management and due diligence tools available. They are dedicated to helping their clients with all of their people-related decisions. To learn more, go to www.peopleg2.com. Talent Talk centers on the topics of talent recruitment and management, leadership development, company culture, and employee engagement. These are all timely topics for CEOs, entrepreneurs, HR professionals, and business leaders. We hope that as you tune in to listen each week, whether to the live broadcast or to the podcast on iTunes or iHeartRadio, that you hear something you can take away that will help you grow and impact your career in a positive way. And now, here's the host of the Talent Talk Radio Show, the founder and CEO of People G2, Chris Dyer.
Hey everyone, welcome to Talent Talk. So happy that you're here. It's 1 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on Tuesday, which means we are live taping this show. And thank you so much for everyone who is tuning in live, although most of you get us later on in the podcast, and that's totally cool too. In fact, we've had, 3-4 million downloads last year of the show. We've had so many fantastic guests that people continue to want to listen to. And that's really what this show is all about, is to have a great conversation with a really smart person who's doing a lot of cool stuff that we can learn from, right? That we can pick their brains, find out what they're thinking about, what are they worried about, what books are they reading, what are they thinking maybe might happen in the near future that we might, make some sort of adjustment for or plan for. So that's really the cusp of the show, because I used to have these conversations all the time, but it was just me and that other person on the phone or at a conference or, at a coffee shop. And I learned a lot, and I got, some of the best advice in some of those conversations, but I realized it'd be so much better if everyone else got to listen in and they got to contribute. So if you want to ask a question, if you want to comment on things that we've talked about today, you can also follow us on Twitter at PeopleG2 or the hashtag Talent Talk. Angela, my social media person, will be live tweeting all the best stuff and links to books and profiles and all of that. So you can definitely be a part of the conversation. And if you ask a great question, we might even try to squeeze it in if you're listening live. We've had so many wonderful stories. I put a lot of them in my first book, The Power of Company Culture, but I actually have a new book coming out this month. In fact, it just arrived at my house the other day from the publisher. I'm super excited. It's called Remote Work. And it's really a culmination of years and years of having my teams all work remotely, my co-author working remotely. And there's a lot of really cool stories of different companies that have been getting it and doing it right, whether it was before or during COVID. So look for that if you're interested. But let's talk about who's on the show today. I'm really excited. We're going to have my first guest will be Lars Schmidt. He's the founder of Redefining HR Accelerator. And then we're going to bring in Shannon Rousseau after the commercial break at Kinetix. She's the CEO and founder of that company. So we're going to have a really kind of diverse conversation here today. But, let's go ahead and bring in Lars. Thank you so much for being on the show today, man.
Yeah, hey, it's good to be here. Appreciate you bringing me in.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Lars, I know you're a writer for Fast Company. You're a co-author of Employer Branding for Dummies. And a host of Redefining HR podcast. And if that wasn't enough, I think if people aren't already impressed, he was named as a top 100 influencer by HR Examiner. He's included in the Huffington Post top 100 most social HR experts on Twitter, and named a top 50 recruiting influencer by LinkedIn. I don't know what's next for you, but I'm excited to find out. Thanks so much for being here. What else should people know about you? What's important for them to know about your background and what you're passionate about to kind of frame our conversation today?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that, listening to someone read your bio is always a humbling and strange thing. I think the most important thing for your listeners to know about me is I'm a dad, a husband, I'm an entrepreneur, and really kind of at my core, all the things you mentioned, that is the end result of my kind of personal mission, which is really accelerating the evolution of the field of HR. Accelerating our capabilities, accelerating our impact, accelerating the work that we do in the field. So
Right.
There's a variety of ways that I do that, but at its core, that's really what drives me.
I would say the first 2 or 3 years of the show, we talked about HR having a seat at the table. That was a very constant conversation. And although it was a good one to have and important to have, I was really happy when the conversation kind of shifted to something else. But for a while, that was really kind of like a big thing for HR, right? Like, when are they going to have not just be the ones being told what was decided, but be at that meeting, at that table to help with what was being decided. So what are is that still something that they're talking about, or are there kind of new things that you think are kind of really fundamental for HR pros right now that is part of that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, we're still talking about it in some circles. We shouldn't be. I think one of the things that, so in my book, Redefining HR, what some of the core kind of underpinnings of it was really comparing and contrasting legacy HR to modern HR and how they're different. And I think if you look at legacy HR and you dissect how they were structured, they really embraced command and control structures. And they did that because they saw control as a pathway to power, and that pathway to power as the opportunity to get that seat at the table. The reality is the opposite happened. It pissed off employees. It cost them credibility with leaders and their executive peers, because it looked like it was creating unnecessary bureaucracy and process for the sake of process. If you shift to the other end of that spectrum and you kind of break down modern HR teams and modern people teams, there's no insecurity there. They know the value they bring to the business, particularly at the leadership level. They're an integral part of the executive team. They're viewed that way from their executive peers. And their model is more around decentralize and empower. It's about actually moving as much of the day-to-day decision-making down to the business, allowing managers to manage, leaders to lead, creating, constructs and frameworks that support them to do that. But not inserting themselves into the day-to-day operations of the teams. And that's a big shift when you kind of compare legacy teams to modern teams.
Yeah, and I've seen a huge sort of jump in the chief people officer type position. So it seems like companies are starting to think about having someone who is thinking more strategically and is involved in those types of things. I mean, for years you could kind of balance, you could kind of see some of the weirdness happening inside of HR. And I think some pressures, legal pressures, which were like, well, you don't want to get sued, so make everything the same and make sure you document everything. And here, your 5-page employee handbook turned into a 5,000-page employee handbook, right? And yet, if I look at some of the best examples, like we had the head of people for GM on, and they said that, their dress code is 2 words: dress appropriately. That's it, right? And look at the average employee handbook, and there is probably 20 pages about that, because somebody wasn't doing it right. Somebody was being stupid, and they decided to go and create 19 policies and 50 different rules and turn it. I mean, I don't know how much you know about Disney, but you turn it to the Disney one, right? Which is like, they even have in their handbook, you have to wear underwear. And so, it's a crazy. So is that the shift? Is that we want to get back to common sense stuff and be able to have these more strategic, thoughtful practices versus handing an HR generalist a problem and saying, fix it, right? And then it turns into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting. One of the other, kind of core components of the book was exactly this. If you look at legacy teams, because the function of HR was rooted in compliance and closely aligned with legal, we were known for being risk averse. And that risk aversion caused us to create, when we were designing policies and frameworks and, handbooks, it was like, what's the worst possible thing that an employee could do? Cool, let's assume everybody's going to do that. And let's build a policy that safeguards the company against that. And it was ridiculous. And so it was policy against the many. And so I think if you look at modern teams, it's about policy for the few. It's about saying, let's assume we're hiring adults. Let's assume they're going to make good intentions. If somebody does something stupid, we'll deal with that. We'll address that on an individual basis. But let's not assume as a default, everybody's going to make that bad choice. Let's assume we're hiring adults who can make good decisions. And when they don't, we'll address that individually, but let's not proactively penalize our employee population just at the possibility of somebody doing something wrong. And so that, again, that is a shift when you look at the modern teams. It's policies for the many, not policies against the few.
Well, I always laugh when if you had a garden and you had a weed come up, you go pick the weed out. You take the weed out, the weed goes. You don't go buy Roundup and spray everything with poison so that you don't get weeds. And I feel like that's what they did, right? we have one bad employee who's doing bad things. Let's create giant policies to make sure no employee ever does this bad thing again. No, get rid of the bad employee.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not rocket science, right? Like you wouldn't, it's kind of just, it should be how we naturally think about things. And we're doing more of that now, but it's also as we're moving away from those kind of command and control centralized functions that we're now thinking a bit more closely to what the business needs and how we can create systems that actually allow our employees to thrive and optimize their experience rather than having everything being rooted in compliance.
I remember watching a documentary on Pat Summitt. She's a famous Tennessee Vols women's basketball coach. And she said in this team meeting one time, they were showing a video, and she said, I can't treat you all the same, but I can treat you fairly. And I was like, I just remember my brain was like blown. It was like, oh, that's it, right?
Yeah.
It's not trying to create repeatable, I'm going to treat everyone exactly the same, because I can't. They all come from different backgrounds. They have different needs. They have different things. And so I've always tried to put that policy in place. And so far that's worked for us, right? That I'm going to try to be fair in every way I can, even if it's not going to be the same outcome or the same thing for every person. That's an easy thing to say and a very hard thing to implement, right? So do you have suggestions on how people might try to do that kind of thing, to have that kind of open-minded, yet somewhat subjective and squishy way of trying to manage people?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one of the interesting positions that we're in as a field right now, especially coming, I'd say coming out of COVID, if it's in past tense, it's not, we're still kind of going through that. But as we move through the pandemic, a big driver that is fairly new to HR and frankly business is personalization, right? It's flexibility. I think we're moving away. We have these kind of industrial era constructs of what work was. Work was 9 to 5, and it was Monday through Friday, and it had to be in an office, and I need to be able to see you to know that you're working, and just these ridiculous notions now that have really been blown up during the pandemic. And so now it's like, it doesn't really matter where you work. And again, I'm generalizing, this doesn't apply to all jobs. Some jobs certainly require you to be in an office or a facility or a location. But for, positions that were able to work remotely during the pandemic, you've demonstrated you don't really have to be in an office to be productive. You don't really have to necessarily work 9 to 5 to be productive. And so I think, the big challenge that's ahead of HR over the next, year, 2, 3 years is having to move from an environment where it was one size fits all to where it is a bit more tailored around employee needs. And so that's going to be a big shift. I don't have the golden answer as like, oh, this is exactly how you do that. Every company's got to fill through that. And every company is going to go through that at their own pace based on their own circumstances. Some CEOs are desperate to get, jam all their employees back in the office, whether they want to go there or not. Some people are redesigning everything around a fully distributed or remote first environment. The reality is most of us are hybrid by default now. To what extent we're hybrid, that's going to vary. But that's really the big work ahead of us right now, which, is not that this is a plug for your book, but I think your book, your second book will certainly be timely with a lot of the struggles and the challenges that we're going to be experiencing over the next couple of years.
Well, the interesting thing is that hybrid is really, if you do it right, you're basically still just doing remote work. Yeah. It just means that some people are in the office and they can go to lunch together if they want, but like you still all have to be on the same Zoom call, right? You're still logging in on your computer. If you act that way and you take that function on, hybrid can work really well. But hybrid's also the most dangerous model. It's the one that is the hardest to get right. It's the one with the most holes and the most politics and the most people just trying to game, because you don't have as much clarity and transparency in there. So, one of the big things I love to talk about is teams and how, we put people together and we have meetings and being able to make that an awesome part of someone's day, right? Making someone gets invited to a meeting, they're going to be excited and happy, not like I'm trying to avoid it and hide under a table and call in sick. So is there kind of a roadmap maybe to building, I guess, this next generation of teams, right? In a post-COVID world, do you think that looks different now and in what ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think how, where, and when we communicate and collaborate as teams is certainly changing. Like, I think this whole notion of synchronous versus asynchronous, work we're really just at the beginning of that conversation in terms of transforming how we think about work. Meaning, like, look at your calendar on any given day. Half your meetings probably don't need to be meetings. Half of those meetings could probably be things that you could coordinate asynchronously via Slack, email, or different collaboration tools. I think when you see tools, especially emerging tools like Almanac and Notion and Coda that allow asynchronous and even synchronous collaboration on documents and tools and resources, so much of what we do could actually be done there. It's not even an email where it's like, I send you one thing, then you send me one thing. It's like, here's this live canvas that people around the world are all working on simultaneously. And we're updating notes, or we're updating action items and to-do lists. So we're adding mock-ups and we're voting on things as they're like, we can do that without being in a room, without being together. And I think that as we start mapping out the next future of work, we don't have a good buzzword for it yet. We need some marketing consultants to help us out, because the future of work is, we're here now, but what's next? As we design whatever that is, I think there's going to be a much bigger focus on asynchronous collaboration and coordination, so that when we do have our synchronous meetings, they are going to be better meetings. They're more meaningful. We're going to get more efficient with that time. Meaning, if I'm putting a calendar invite on your schedule, I'm going to send you an agenda. I'm going to send you the specific things that we're going to cover in advance, so that you can prep and we can get in there and jump into that. Like, there's no reason, if we're going to have a meeting to talk about X, that you haven't seen X before that meeting, so that you already have an opinion on it that you can add to that meeting. If we're all sitting in that meeting reviewing X, huge waste of time. And so I think we're going to be getting more efficient with how we look at where we invest our time, and really how we break up our work in terms of synchronous and asynchronous.
Yeah, I mean, we found that very quickly with the async. Our research team, someone could go in and work on stuff and say, this is where I left off, and I need these two things, looked at. And they would have had a meeting before, right? They would have done that. And now you just can work right through it, and people can work any time of the day. I mean, it's really fascinating. One of the big lessons that we learned as an organization when we went fully remote, and I think this applies for hybrid as well, and I would love to get your thoughts. I'm a big believer that you pretty much shouldn't have any more one-on-one meetings. Now, there are some exceptions. There's some HR stuff. There's maybe some training stuff. I mean, there are reasons you occasionally need to. And usually, if you just go back and think about it, right? If I'm going to have a meeting with you, does anyone else need to be on that call? Would anybody else benefit from what we're going to talk about? Whether it's to learn, whether it's to contribute, whether it's because they're going to have to take on whatever we decide, right? And go and deliver. And so I'm a big proponent for, like, get your team, get 5 to 7 people together all the time, right? Keep talking, and you can move information around quickly. And you also eliminate all of this, the politics and the talking and the gossip, right? Because you don't have people connecting one-on-one going, oh, well, they want to complain about Susie. No, let's get on a call with Susie and let's work out what the problem is, right? And deal with it. So do you think that that's going to be, are we going to become more, it's almost more tribal, right? It's almost like kind of going back in time to let's make decisions together because we need people, right? And we sort of broke up. We only needed ourselves. And now I feel like we're kind of coming back to this, well, we need people again all the time. What do you think?
It's interesting. I think that where maybe, I get your point. I think where I would maybe push back a little bit in terms of one-on-one is I think that one of the things that has really kind of come to the surface for a lot of organizations, a lot of companies, is the unique kind of human circumstances of every individual employee, meaning especially kind of going through the pandemic where you've had some employees in a studio apartment in a city who are, isolated and lonely and climbing up the walls. You had others who were homeschool teachers and they had 3 kids at home who now they were working and teaching. You had others with underlying health conditions that were, had the anxiety and stress about, a global pandemic raging, or elder care issues. There's so many different human factors that I think we're talking about at work in ways we weren't talking about before, that I think those one-to-ones are where you have an opportunity to maybe check in on somebody and kind of really understand how they are, where they are, what they're doing, what they need. I think that manager to employee one-to-one is still really important. I don't think that goes away. I think you've got to be more mindful of what, whether the thing you're putting on someone's calendar really needs to be a thing on their calendar. And I think a lot of one-on-ones don't need to be one-on-ones. That probably goes back to the like, is synchronous live the best way to do things when things could be async? I think those kind of one-on-one meetings, I do see that, there'd be less and less need for that. But I do think particularly between managers and employees, I think that one-to-one connection is still really important, particularly as we're wanting to just the role of a manager right now, it's like, how can I remove blockers that are holding you back from doing your best work? And that might be a very work related thing, right? Like this person is hoarding all this information. I can't get it from them in order to deliver my thing. Or it could be a personal thing that, I think now we're in a position where people are more comfortable and open because of what we've experienced as a, collective in humanity, talking about and saying, like, hey, like being a homeschool teacher sucks. Like, this is really hard. My kid is struggling and it's killing me to like see that I'm responsible for their education and development. And I feel like I'm failing them. And meanwhile, like I'm late on this project. And so I feel like I'm failing you, right? Like, I think those kind of conversations that's not an email, that's not a Slack message. And so those scenarios, I think one-on-ones are still important.
Yeah. And I guess, where I sort of then teeter out of that a little bit is that, I am now as their manager responsible for that. And I'm the only one hearing them and listening to them and potentially helping them, which is a big burden for most leaders, for most managers, right? They might have 5 direct reports. They might have 20 direct reports. Mm-hmm. How do you possibly, get to everyone and really be effective for everybody? So there are scenarios. You might have someone who's like dealing with something very personal, something very cute, right? Of course. But in general, we found we would get them together and we would talk about things as a group, and it would come out. And because someone else had that problem, somebody else now would actually mention it. And they started solving problems for each other, which allowed me as the leader to be more of a facilitator, right? And then I started grouping people. So like you mentioned, I'm living all by myself, I'm crawling the walls. Okay, let's get those people together for trivia night or cocktail Friday or whatever, right? But the homeschool teaching parent, they want to be left alone. They're like, leave me alone, no more meetings, lower my expectations at work, give me more flexibility, right? And they actually did want to come together to talk about how they were handling the kids and strategies and stuff. But I would just think, like, if I haven't walked in their shoes, if I don't know exactly the problem they're having, am I really, even though I'm their manager, am I really the best person to help them?
Yeah. I would say, like, I think in that, I guess with that last framing, part of it is also, we talk about the pandemic because obviously that's a huge thing, but like one of their big shifts for HR right now is like the way that we're thinking about systemic inequity and racism and racial justice. And that, I think in particular in the framing of that last context, it's hugely important for managers who, especially if it's a white manager who has managing people of color on their team, that is able to, even though like I can't put myself in your head when you watch another one of your another person of color, another Black man be killed by the police, and like know what emotions that's bringing up in you. But like I want to be able to be compassionate to that. I want to be able to empathize with that, even though I know I can't walk in your shoes, and like know that on the day after the verdict for Derek Chauvin's murder trial, that you probably are going to have a pretty heavy day, and I probably, as your manager, shouldn't put a lot on your plate that day. And in fact, if I can step in and clear your schedule, right, and just say, you know what, I'll take all your meetings off. I know this is going to be an emotional day, a heavy day. Like just take time for you and your family. Don't worry about the work stuff like that. As a manager who might not be able to personally relate to those feelings, I'm still demonstrating that I understand that one of my reports is going through something that I want to be able to support them on. And it's hard. You're right. Doing that at scale is difficult. But I think that's part of the art of management right now.
Yeah. And I love the idea. I love that idea. It's a great example. I guess you just, if you have 20 direct reports and you have 21, 30-minute phone calls or 1-hour phone calls, when are you going to work?
Yeah. You got to make them 15, make them 50, get efficient with that time.
Right.
I mean, that's, you got to make it short, but I think those checking that human connection, particularly in this era where we don't have it, I think is hugely important.
Well, Lars, you've been a fantastic guest. I've learned a lot. We're kind of at the end here. I know it's gone quickly, but How can people find out more about you? Where can they find you online? What's the best way for them to learn more about you if they're interested in all the different things that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, the hub for all my work is redefininghr.com. So you can get the book, the podcast, the Accelerator community newsletter. Everything is housed there. So I like to make it easy to find for those that are looking.
Well, don't forget, we'll put that link on Twitter. And Lars, thanks again for being on the show. Hopefully we can have you come back soon and pick up the conversation. I really enjoyed having you here today.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Chris. Thanks so much.
All right, we'll be right back after this quick commercial break and bring in our second guest, Shannon Rousseau.
Imagine buying a newspaper and discovering that the news you're reading is 6 months old. There isn't much that stays the same for 6 months. And the same thing goes for background checks. In a time when so much outdated information is being passed around, it's good to know that People G2 offers something different. At People G2, we provide today's intelligence, not yesterday's news. Our value-added approach offers you a fully FCRA-compliant solution that includes up-to-the-minute information. By combining industry-leading technology with old-school human investigation, People G2 is able to give you information that is accurate right now, delivered quickly to our online system, or integrated with your HR system. So ask yourself, are you comfortable working with old news, or are you ready for a different kind of background check company? Visit peopleg2.com or call 800-630-2880. That's 800-630-2880 or peopleg2.com.
Welcome back to the Talent Talk Radio Show. In case you missed my first guest, you can get this whole podcast. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us as a podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. I mean, like, we're everywhere, so you can't miss us. Make sure you subscribe so you can be alerted anytime there is a new episode. And we'd love to have you always check us out. Let us know how we're doing. And make sure you're following along on Twitter at PeopleG2 or that hashtag Talent Talk. We are there putting in the best one-liners, links to profiles, links to books that maybe been mentioned, anything that's kind of going on. We do it. So let's go ahead and bring in my second guest to the show. This is Shannon Rousseau, CEO and founder of, and I always have a hard time in saying this. Hopefully I'm going to say it right. Kinetix. Oh, I should have known. Whatever my guess was, it was going to be wrong. I should have done the opposite. So anyways, how are you today, Shannon? Thank you so much for being here.
I'm great. Other than some thunderstorms coming through Atlanta, everything is great.
Well, that seems to be a comment. About every other time I fly through Atlanta, there seems to be a thunderstorm. So that's not too new. For me, a thunderstorm is like once every decade in California. So
there you go. So par for the course today.
Today. Well, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, kind of your background, and of course, your awesome company as well.
Sure. Thanks for having me on here, first of all, Chris. I appreciate that. I'm the CEO and actually the founder of Kinetix. We are a recruitment process outsourcing firm based in Atlanta, but we operate nationally in the US. And been doing that for a pretty long period of time, 16 years, as a matter of fact. Prior to that, I worked for one of the world's largest workforce solutions companies. So that's a little bit about me, mom of 3 kids, like to run.
Awesome. Well, I know we have a lot to talk about today with, your background and the specific things that your company does. You've been the CEO over there at Kinetix for 16 years. I think it sounds like a long time. I've been with mine, now 20 years. So time flies, right? It's like you go by real fast. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit more, like, what kind of drew you to this world, right? The RPO world, what kind of brought you into there?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I started my career in banking and then worked for some global companies. And what I would tell you is finally had the opportunity to join a workforce solutions company a few years later. And instead of making fumed silica that actually makes your toothpaste foam, it was a little more exciting and felt like more impactful to help folks get jobs, or that was my initial thought process. Mm-hmm. And so that's what got me into that business. And then 10 years later got me to form Kinetix. So it's sort of kind of a hop skip. My goal really was, I learned a ton, but I also got to see the good bad, and ugly, to coin a term, right? And so my goal was really sort of take some of the best things that I really saw and try to get rid of some of the things that I felt like were terrible.
Right, right. Now, my co-author on my new book, Remote Work, she used to run a recruiting firm for many years until she sold it.
Okay.
And so it was always fascinating to kind of hear the different things that she was kind of focused on, or the way in which the industry seems to just sort of, I don't know if I want to say rapidly change. It's almost like a ping pong ball. Like what's sort of being focused on right now. So
What matters?
Yeah, what matters. I mean, so what's kind of exciting about the recruiting industry right now?
So there's a whole bunch of things, and one of the things I'll add to that is we are a recruitment outsourcer, so we are more closely aligned with talent acquisition professionals on the corporate side, with the perspective and push that your friend that owned that recruiting firm is sort of like that, the best of that, along with some of the best things that the corporate side might have. So that's one small nuance to our business. But what's happening right now, holy cow, recovery is not the right word. I would say like a huge ping pong. If last year for most folks on the talent acquisition side was what I might call a deep V, in terms of really first quarter and then a significant drop off down to zero in many cases, and people laying off, right? So you kind of had the other side. And then starting with some trepidation in the fall, and then by the second week of January, there's other things I could say, but I would say flat against the wall, right? Right. That's what I would say, and more, more.
Yeah, and in running a background check company, we saw the same thing. I would call it a W, right? There was the COVID part of it, and then there was the election part of it. And it was just
we're not
crazy.
Sure. What are we going to do? And then everybody was like, "Wait, we really haven't recruited for months and months. Let's do all of it right now."
Right now, yeah. So, how does your software then help people do that? If they do it the right way, or they wait to the last minute to do it? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah. So what I would tell you is for us, we're sort of seeing that pressure of people who really weren't thinking through the workforce side of their business last year in the what's coming next. Now they're really suffering with trying to hire while everyone else is trying to do the same thing. So if you have skill sets that are in demand, of which there's a number, right? Then you are competing with everyone else all at the same time with a group of candidates that have different perspectives than they did a year ago. And that also may change their view of you as a hiring company, let's say. And so where we are really trying to help is to keep our clients focused on the things that will make them successful in getting the talent they need as fast as possible into their company. And sometimes that means changing their process, thinking about it differently, remembering that the sales process goes both ways. If you're recruiting someone, they're selling to you why they're the right fit for your job, but you're also selling to them why you're the right fit for them.
Have you seen your clients maybe embracing a bit more of what I would call the advantage to remote work, right? Where you don't have location bias anymore. Now you can be in Atlanta, but go hire someone in Kansas or whatever, right? They don't have to be in, let's say, Atlanta to join your team. So have you seen more willingness to do that?
I'm going to say somewhat yes, not an unequivocal yes that we might all think is what it should be. So, if I talk about Kinetix, we didn't have that bias before, even though we were based in Atlanta. So we did have a good presence because that's where we started. But we were hiring people really in the Eastern Seaboard just to have time change things managed a little bit. But we didn't have that bias. But some of our clients, I literally have a client that we're working on a search for today. Everybody's still in the office. They went home for like 4 weeks and they still are like, why do we have to allow remote work? And I'm like, well, we should talk more about that. But for their team, they kept them all for the most part, certainly through the downturn they did. And so I've been trying to help them understand what might be coming on the other side of that. And so I would say yes, but not as a resounding yes as you would think. We can talk about components of the recruiting process, and I think there's been a lot of change there related to remote work. And I do think that the more folks that are thinking about it strategically, they can think through that. And I think a lot of it depends on the type of job and then hiring leaders' comfort level with that.
Right. Well, I know it is sort of anecdotal. I mean, that being one company, but and then maybe they'll be in the minority that they brought people back so quickly. But certainly the McKinsey study that just came out said that, if you don't offer some flexible work, about 33% of your people are saying that they're going to go find another job. They are not going back full time into the office. And what's even scarier about that number is that your top 15% of your employees are in that 33. So it's not like your worst employees are going to look to leave. It's your best employees are looking to leave.
Right.
If you're not going to have the flexible work. And I think, so when that starts happening, when we start seeing more of the populous areas in the country going back to normal, being allowed to have more people, and seeing what decisions
people make.
They make, right?
Yes.
If it's just, well, the CFO says this is how he used to work in his day, we're all going to come back to the office, you might get a lot busier real fast.
You're not wrong. And it's an interesting dialogue. I would tell you it's a mixed bag. That one I talked about is not the only client that I have that wants that. Some of them are, we've got another one that's a technology startup and they're like, hey, we're a tech startup. We really need those hallway conversations. So we can do remote and we will do remote. You're going to miss out if you don't come into the office. And I'm like, that's an interesting approach. So they're like, you can do it and we'll hire you that way. If you want to be one of the leaders in this cool startup, venture-backed, right? We know that those hallway conversations are critical to how we're building this. And I was like, okay, because we're trying to hire developers, right? It's an interesting dialogue. So I would tell you that it's not as clear cut as folks make it out to be. And I think to your sort of comment about the study, the real where the rubber meets the road is in between those lines. Right. Because the reality is both can work and there's a mix, and you really got to think about the type of job and how you're going to manage it and those types of things, in my mind, to get there successfully and then be able to articulate that as you're recruiting.
I love when I hear the hallway conversations excuse. It's just another way to say, we just want to be together. We don't know how to do it a different way, and we're not willing to learn. And so, but we know we have to put lipstick on a pig and we'll say we do remote work, right? But that's not really it. And
I was shocked by it because, by the way, the product that they have and that they build is all about touchless. So I'm kind of like, are we really having this conversation? But we are.
Yeah. And it's so funny. It's so easy to have those hallway conversations remotely if you create that space, you create that environment for your people. I mean, I've been brought in as a consultant to do that for a lot of companies. My company's been doing it now since 2009, right? And we used to all be in one office that we could probably throw a pen in any direction and hit any employee. We were that close to each other all the time.
Yep.
And our communication level went up, our brainstorming went up, our innovation went up, our growth went up. Everything got better when we went remote.
But you had to be intentional about it. And the folks that were not good at that failed, may not have made it, or they struggled with it.
Yeah. If your culture is bad, I always say this, if your culture is bad, going remote is just going to make it worse. I mean, does not help a bad culture. It only helps a good culture, right? Where people want to have thoughtful conversations and they want to be connected and they want, to do things in a new way and think about it. I mean, I don't know. I've used this example before, but can you imagine how many cowboys were complaining about sitting in that bumpy car because the roads weren't very good? You could just sit on a saddle. You could ride a horse all day. Why would you want that car? That's just, you know what I mean? And then before you know it, boom, riding a horse was a hobby, not a way to get somewhere.
Not a business, right proposition.
Right. So how much longer will some of those companies, not be able to go? And we'll see. I think that you're right. In between the lines is a really good way to frame it. People can always work together if they want. I just think they're going to be able to work flexibly, right? You're going to be able to really get great talent. And especially if you're a startup, if you're Google, if you're Apple, if you're Facebook, you're going to get great people for totally different reasons.
That's right.
But if you're XYZ, whatever company, and no one knows who you are, you better have the advantage of, hey, we work remotely, we're flexible, we do all these other things that might make you want to choose us instead of Google or whatever, right?
Yeah, it's for us, one of the things, because we're a recruitment firm, for us, top of the funnel is just what you touched on, which we might call the employer value proposition, which is what's in it for me as a candidate to come and work for you, right? And become an employee. We're super passionate about that. And we would say that more people will need to focus on that, because while somebody might go to Google or Apple or Facebook for a whole other set of reasons, if you are a startup and no one understands your business, understands what value, understands how they fit in the overall success of that, you're going to have to get significantly tighter in your ability to help your hiring leaders articulate that value in order to recruit the best people. You won't need it to recruit the people that need a job. And I don't want to say it that way, but there's a difference. And so if you want the best of the best, you have to be able to sort of match that.
Right. You know, pre-pandemic, because we're remote, we could really learn a lot about how someone might do at our company just by the interaction we would have with them on video calls and all that remote, sort of thing, right? Do they even have a webcam? Could they figure out how to turn it on? Could they, could they
connect?
Could they connect? Was their internet good? Was there, I don't know, scary animals like taxidermied on their wall, or like, what sort of like weird thing was happening that they couldn't think to turn their camera so we wouldn't see, right? And so I have noticed now with COVID, though, of course, everyone's gotten really good at Zoom.
Truly.
Right?
Yes.
And it's now a part of the norm. And so has this made part of what you guys do different, better, as far as being able to interview people and be able to really figure out who they are and if they're the right fit?
It's a great question. I would say, unfortunately, it depends. So sometimes, without question, it's easy. If they are going to have to work in a remote situation and they struggle with what's happening right out of the gate, or right more than a couple clicks off, it's really easy for us to make a decision on behalf of our clients early.
Right.
Where it's tough is where they've mastered that part, but it's not who they are. It's not who they are, right? And so you got to look for some other clues. And we end up doing a multiple layered approach in terms of how we do it. We might talk to you on the phone, then we might do video. We're going to set you up with a video, which might be a panel video, right? So then that's a whole nother dynamic. And so that combination may suss some things out. But I would say, unfortunately, it's not significantly easier, because all we did was change out what the things are. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times that initial screen is on the phone. And depending on the job, they may not care about this part, right? So I know that's also another thing, right? So a lot of our healthcare clients, where it's care related, that's what's important, not whether or not they can get on a video. So while we're using that, and that's really helped to expedite the process, if that makes sense, which we would tell them is a strength in terms of getting the best people. But that skill is not as important to the hiring leaders. They might not even be good at it. So we've had those kind of challenges as well, right? The interviewer is the challenge, not the interviewee, and managing that. So it's a lot of it depends. And I hate that, because I'd love to give you unequivocal answers, but I can't.
Yeah, and we've just sort of had fun with it, where, we've tested different things. So we've given them a set of instructions on what they need to do from between the first interview and the second interview. And you see, well, who figures it out right on their own? Who, even if they can't figure it out, that's okay, comes back and asks questions.
Yes.
Right? And says, hey, I didn't understand this. I'm sorry, but I'm not able to go on this site, or do what you want me to do. Okay, let me help you. Right? Cool. Yes. They ask questions. And then who just doesn't do it, or pretends that they sent it to you, or and didn't, and you start to pick up on so much, right? Yes. And then it was well, okay, can they handle the video interview on the technical parts and the internet and all that stuff, right? Did they think about where they were going to be? Is there a bunch of noise and cats running off through the screen, whatever? I mean, you got, and again, you're tying that to the job, right? I'm hiring someone at minimum wage. That's a totally different expectation than I'm hiring a senior executive.
That's right. Project manager to do something where they're going to have to be in front of people, they're representing you. It's a whole different game.
But there's even fun things we've done where in the initial process, we would just ask them in writing, tell us the difference between Louis Armstrong, Lance Armstrong, and Neil Armstrong. And just wait and see the kind of answers you get. And I will guarantee you will know everything you need to know about that person and how they respond. Right?
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome.
It's not a trick. They can go
It's
on
not
the
a
internet.
trick. They have time.
Right. It's not like you hear like those Google questions or Elon Musk
You're on
questions.
the spot. Figure it out right now while I'm watching you.
Yeah, I'm not into like that thing. You know, I want to see, because you know what? I've had people write back one-word answers, and they're going to be in a job where communication is really important.
It's important.
Nope. Right? Easy
answer. Right. So the way I think about that, and the way we talk to clients about that, is making decisions on jobs to put hurdles. So you wouldn't call it that, and that's not the way you meant it, but it actually is something, whatever it is. It's something that's going to help you vet. It's going to save you time, and it's going to kind of give you something to compare across the board. And so our coaching a lot is, if you have sold them enough to get them super interested, they should do those hurdles. And if they don't, so we have a hurdle, we use a psychometric. If you don't take it, we don't interview you. Simple, right? So it's similar to yours, but different. We don't do it before we talk to them because we're trying to figure out, right? But it is, in effect, a little bit of a hurdle, because if you don't do it, you clearly don't want the job.
Right. And we do that. We do that with salespeople. We give them, and because we really want to know. I mean, it's really important for us to know more about them, but we give them a very long test, because if they're not willing to sit through that, I mean, it's a long test. If they're not willing to do that, then they're not really looking. They're not really going to leave, or they're not really going to put in the effort they've got, because it's not, it is a long process typically to sell what we sell. It's not like you just call someone up and you get a sale that day and you're done, right? It is a follow-up, work through the process over a long period of time. So if you can't be, again, but it's a totally different expectation for sales than it would be for like research, right? Or it would be
without question.
Right.
Yeah.
So
you got to fit it. That's the other part, right? That we're sort of talking about without saying it, is you need to fit the process to the role. It's not one size fits all. It's literally not. That's not the path to success. And even more so now, you need to be more intentional about what is success with these people in this role, whatever it is that I'm recruiting for. What do I need? And therefore, how do I think about the process, and where might I have fall off? And remember, we talk about this a lot, but often HR folks don't think about it this way. Recruiting is a sales function. Recruiting is a sales process. So when we talk about the recruiting process, when I talk about the recruiting process, I'm thinking about that funnel and where the problems are and where I have passed through issues and what's causing them and whether or not I want it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you bring up a really good point about, you have to, it's so funny. In fact, I'm thinking about doing a webinar on this. In fact, I may ask you to be on the panel, because it would make perfect sense, because I think that marketing and talent acquisition often don't play enough together. They should be playing with each other a lot more, right?
They should.
And it's like what you're putting out there, right? If you're putting out one image of your brand that does not align with the people you want to get, then what are you doing, right?
Yes. They A, should do it more, and B, if they don't have time, which is what we often find, right? Because they're spending all their time and effort on the brand, then carve out an employer brand person, process, whatever it is, and deliver messages, because the other difference is your company brand may not be the same as the key kind of talent you're trying to recruit, right? Where your pain point is. And so align those messages with what matters to them. That's the other biggest thing, right? It's same from a client standpoint, right? It's what matters to them, not what matters to you, in order to get them in the funnel. And then you can do your testing and your vetting and figuring out if it's the right fit. But if you don't have enough in the funnel, you won't know if you're getting the right hire.
Right. Well, I so appreciate you being on the show with us today. I know I've learned a lot. I hope our listeners have learned a lot that they can go back to their companies and think about doing. If people are interested in working with you, working with your company, what's the best way for them to find you guys, to reach out, to learn more? Where should they go?
Yeah. kinetixhr.com, KINETIXHR.com. That's our website. And you can actually get directly to me or my partner or any of us there. If you wanted to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, it would be /in Shannon W. Russo. So simple, pretty simple in terms of getting there.
Well, again, thank you so much for being on the show today. Hopefully we can have you come back sometime in the near future. We'd love to keep the conversation going and keep track of how you and the company are doing. So thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks everyone for tuning into today's show. Hopefully you've gained something you can use in your own career in a positive way. Until next time, we'll be back live next Tuesday. Do what you love and show the world how talented you can be today.
You've been listening to Talent Talk Radio, brought to you by People G2.
This is CBS News on the Hour.